What would you do if your own child looked you in the eye and told you that you weren't special enough to be at his wedding? That's exactly what happened to Elaine Parker, a mother who spent years paying her son's rent, filling his fridge, and sacrificing her own comfort only to discover she wasn't even invited to the most important day of his life. But the betrayal didn't end there. Days later, her phone rang with a chilling demand for more money, as if nothing had happened. That moment ignited a battle Elaine never expected one that would pit her against her own son and daughter-in-law in a fight for dignity, freedom, and the truth about love. Stay with me, because what Elaine does next will shock you, inspire you, and prove that sometimes the most powerful word a parent can say is no. The phone call should have been ordinary, just a mother checking in on her only son. Instead, it felt like someone had ripped the floor from beneath Elaine Parker's feet. "Brian," she had asked with a smile in her voice, "when's the wedding date? I want to mark it on my calendar." But it wasn't Brian who answered. It was Chelsea, her daughter-in-law, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She leaned back on Elaine's sofa, the sofa Elaine herself had bought, and said with a casual cruelty that could cut glass, "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." Those 4 words, "only special people," hit Elaine like ice water poured straight down her spine. For 3 years, she had been the one quietly saving them. She had covered their rent every month, $500 like clockwork. She had bought every stick of furniture in their apartment, stocked their fridge when the shelves were bare, even sacrificed her own comfort so they wouldn't go without. She had thought her devotion made her special, but apparently to Chelsea it hadn't made her worthy of a seat at her own son's wedding. Elaine stood frozen in her own living room, the phone heavy in her hand as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. Brian wouldn't even meet her eyes. He just stared at the carpet, letting his wife twist the knife. Upstairs, hanging uselessly in her closet, was the pale lavender dress she'd chosen so carefully for the big day. She had even bought new shoes, had rehearsed how she'd smile for the photographs that would now exist without her. She had set aside $1,000 to hand them as a wedding gift, planning to give it with tears of joy. She had called her sister Margaret in Boston, bragging about her excitement. She had scrubbed her house until the floors gleamed, hoping they'd stop by after the ceremony. All of it shattered with those poisoned words. Only special people. When Brian finally did speak, his voice sounded rehearsed, almost robotic. "Mom, it was small. Just us 2 witnesses, that's all." But Elaine knew better. Social media was mercilessly honest. She had already seen the photos, Chelsea's parents beaming beside the happy couple, her siblings raising champagne flutes, the bride's gown dazzling white, the very gown Elaine had unknowingly financed with the emergency $800 Chelsea had asked for just weeks earlier. Elaine had seen it all, and she had seen enough. 1 week later, her phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't cold or smug. It was desperate. Elaine Chelsea said, her voice trembling, "The rent is overdue. The landlord says if we don't pay by Friday, we'll be evicted. You forgot to make the transfer." Elaine's hand tightened on the receiver. Forgot. As if her bank transfers were their God-given right. As if her retirement savings, the inheritance her late husband had left, existed solely to bail them out. She thought of every check she'd rushed to write every grocery trip where she'd filled their fridge while her own cupboards went bare, every bill she'd sacrificed for so they could live comfortably. And now, after excluding her from the most sacred day of their lives, they had the audacity to call her as if nothing had happened. Her voice, when it came, was calm, eerily calm even to her own ears. "Chelsea," she said, "didn't I tell you I only help special people?" The silence on the other end was deafening. For the first time, it wasn't Elaine who was trembling. "Elaine, I don't understand," Chelsea stammered. "We've always been special to you. You're like a second mum to me. Lies, all lies." Delivered in that sweet, manipulative tone Chelsea only used when she wanted something. The same voice she had used when asking Elaine for money for the dress for the honeymoon for the rings, exchanged in a ceremony Elaine had never even been invited to witness. For years, Elaine had been the silent provider, the invisible backbone. She had calculated in her head, and the number made her sick. More than $33,000 gone. Money that could have secured her retirement money, that could have been used for trips she'd dreamed of taking with her late husband. Money she could have spent on herself after a lifetime of sacrifice. All wasted on two adults who couldn't even pretend to respect her. That night, Elaine sat on the edge of her bed and wept. But her tears weren't soft tears of sadness. They were hot, burning tears of rage and betrayal. She wept for the years she had been invisible, for the times she had walked on eggshells, hoping to earn a crumb of affection for the foolishness of a mother who believed money could buy her son's love. And when the tears dried, something inside her shifted. The next morning, Elaine stood before the bathroom mirror. The same lined face, the same tired eyes, but behind them burned something new steel. She went to the kitchen, brewed coffee like she had every morning for 40 years. But this time she didn't reach for her phone to check if Brian had texted. For once, she was her own first concern. At her dining table, where she had spent countless hours balancing their bills, she spread out her bank statements. Line by line, she added it up: rent, food, gifts, emergencies, whims. Every dollar she had thrown into a black hole. Every dollar she would never see again. $33,400. Her late husband's inheritance, her savings, her future. Her phone rang. Brian's name flashed on the screen, then Chelsea's, again and again. Elaine let it ring unmoved, sipping her coffee. For the first time in years, she didn't answer. That afternoon, she walked to the park, the same park where she used to push Brian on the swings, where he would cling to her neck and whisper, "You're the best mum in the world." Her chest tightened with the memory. When had that sweet boy become this entitled man who saw her as nothing but a living ATM? When had she begun confusing love with money? At the bank, the branch manager, Richard Holloway, greeted her with surprise. "Mrs. Parker here as always for the transfers." "Not this time," Richard Elaine said firmly. "I want every automatic transfer cancelled, and I want safeguards on my accounts. From now on, my money belongs to me." For the first time in years, she felt light. The shackles had been broken. But as Elaine left the bank, a dark thought crept in. Brian and Chelsea wouldn't let go so easily. To them, she wasn't a mother or even a person. She was a paycheck. And when they discovered their lifeline had been cut off, they wouldn't just call. They'd come. And Elaine knew the real battle hadn't even begun yet. Elaine Parker thought cutting off the transfers would give her peace. For a short time, it did. She woke up without rushing to the bank. She took long walks, bought herself a warm coat for the first time in years, and even sat quietly in her living room without the buzzing anxiety of Chelsea's constant demands. But deep down she knew. Silence doesn't last when money's involved. The first knock on her door came just 3 days after she cancelled the transfers. Elaine glanced through the peephole and her stomach dropped. Brian and Chelsea stood on her porch, flanked by a man in a pressed grey suit carrying a briefcase. When Elaine opened the door, Brian's face was red, his jaw tight. Chelsea wore that familiar mask of desperation dressed up as tenderness. The stranger stepped forward first. "Mrs. Parker," he said, flashing a card. "I'm Thomas Greer, family attorney. Your son and daughter-in-law have asked me to Elaine cut him off. To what convince me to fund their lives again? Or to tell me I'm too old to know what I'm doing?" Chelsea's voice quivered. "Elaine, please, this is just a misunderstanding. You've been acting different. We're worried about you. Maybe stress, maybe loneliness. We just want to help you manage things. Manage my things." Elaine's voice sliced through the air like a whip. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? My money?" Brian stepped forward, his tone halfway between pleading and threatening. "Mum, we can't just be cut off like this. We have bills. We counted on you." "Exactly," Elaine shot back. "That's the problem." The lawyer cleared his throat. Mrs. Parker, your children only want to ensure you're cared for. A simple power of attorney would make it easier for them to oversee your finances. Temporary, of course, until you feel better." Elaine's hand trembled, but her voice didn't. She snatched the folder from his hands, flipped it open, and saw the truth. A legal document giving Brian and Chelsea control over everything she owned. Without hesitation, she tossed it straight into the trash. "The only transition happening here," she said coldly, "is you transitioning out of my house." Chelsea's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of rage. "Elaine, you can't do this to us. We've made plans. We bought things You made plans with my money," Elaine snapped. "You never planned to stand beside me at my husband's grave. You never planned to include me in your wedding. You only planned to drain me dry." Brian's face twisted, the boy she once knew vanishing behind a mask of entitlement. "This is going to end badly for you," he said. "One day you'll be alone, no one to take care of you." Elaine's reply was sharp, heartbreaking in its clarity. "Brian, I already am alone. The only difference is now it's by choice, not by your neglect." The lawyer ushered them out, but Elaine knew this wasn't the end. It was only the opening shot of a war. That night she sat at her kitchen table again, but this time with a different purpose. She wasn't counting bills for Brian and Chelsea. She was writing a plan, her plan. First, she would secure her accounts. Second, she would change the locks. Third, she would build a wall of proof, every receipt, every transfer, every humiliating dollar she had given them, so that if they tried to drag her into court, she could fight back. The next morning, Elaine walked into Holloway Bank again. Richard Holloway looked startled to see her. "Mrs. Parker," he said gently, "are you sure about all this?" "For years you've been," I'm sure Elaine interrupted. "Cancel every transfer, lock down my accounts, and if anyone tries to challenge me, I want to know how to protect what's mine." Richard nodded. "You've been generous far too long. It's time you protect yourself." As she left the bank, her phone buzzed with texts. Brian, Chelsea, even unknown numbers. "Answer us. We need to talk. Mum, please, don't do this." Elaine deleted them without reading further. For once, her silence was power. But Brian and Chelsea weren't silent. That weekend, Elaine returned from a walk to find 3 cars parked outside her home. Her blood ran cold. Through the window, she saw them inside. Brian hunched on her couch, Chelsea pacing like a caged animal, and Greer rifling through her private papers on the dining table. Elaine pushed open the door, fury burning away her fear. What is happening here? All 3 froze like children caught stealing cookies. Chelsea rushed forward, plastering on a fake smile. "Thank God you're home. We're only trying to help. Mr. Greer thinks maybe you need someone to step in just temporarily." "My situation," Elaine's voice rose. "I am perfectly fine. What I am not is your personal bank account anymore." Brian stood, face darkening. "Mum, you've changed. You don't answer our calls. You cancelled everything. We're worried you're confused." The word hit Elaine like a slap. Confused. That was their game. If they could paint her as senile, they could take everything. She pointed to the door. "Get out." Greer tried to sound calm. "Mrs. Parker, if you continue to make irrational financial decisions, a court can intervene. Guardianship." Elaine laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Rational? You think it's rational to bleed a 71-year-old woman dry to exclude her from her own son's wedding, to break into her home and steal her documents? You want a court. Fine, let's go to court. I've got every receipt, every transfer, every humiliation saved. You want a fight? You'll get one." Chelsea's tears dried instantly, her mask slipping. "This isn't over," she spat. "No," Elaine said, her voice low and steady. "It's just beginning." That night, Elaine called David Whitmore, a lawyer she had once met through her late husband. She explained everything. He listened carefully, then said something that sent a shiver down her spine. "Elaine, this is called elder financial abuse. And it's more common than you think. The good news is you're not powerless. If they want war, you have the law on your side. But you need to be ready. This won't stop at threats. They'll escalate. Elaine hung up with her hands trembling, but not from fear, from adrenaline. For years she had cried in silence. Now she had fuel. And for the first time she wasn't afraid of the fight. But the next morning proved just how far Brian and Chelsea were willing to go. Elaine woke to a knock on her door. On her porch stood a young woman in a blazer, a clipboard in hand, a badge hanging from her neck. "Good morning, Mrs. Parker," she said smoothly. "I'm from Adult Protective Services. We've received a report that you may be unable to manage your finances or daily life. I need to conduct a wellness check." Elaine's blood turned to ice. They had escalated. It was no longer just a family fight. They had called in the government. Elaine Parker sat stiffly in her living room as the young social worker from Adult Protective Services scribbled notes on her clipboard. Every word the woman spoke felt like an accusation planted by Brian and Chelsea. "We've received reports," the worker said smoothly, "that you've been isolating yourself, refusing medical help, and making erratic financial decisions." Erratic, isolating, confused. Words twisted like weapons. Elaine recognized Chelsea's handwriting in them, even if it wasn't on the page. She lifted her chin. "I'm not answering another question without my attorney present." Minutes later, David Whitmore arrived. His presence filled the room with calm authority. He placed a folder of neatly organized documents on the table: bank statements, medical records receipts, proof of her independence. "My client is fully competent," David said firmly. "What you're seeing is not confusion, it's clarity. What she's experiencing is elder financial abuse, and we have the evidence to prove it." The worker's professional mask cracked. She glanced at Elaine, then at the meticulous records David spread across the table. After a long silence, she closed her folder. "Mrs. Parker," she said gently, "I see no indication you're at risk. I'll be closing this case." As the door shut behind her, Elaine felt the air rush from her lungs. Relief swept over her in a tide so strong she nearly collapsed. Brian and Chelsea had tried to strip her dignity, her freedom, but she had stood her ground. 3 weeks later, the battle reached its climax in court. Brian and Chelsea sat across the aisle, their lawyer spouting claims of mental decline. Chelsea even cried on the stand, painting herself as a worried daughter-in-law, desperate to save Elaine from her own poor decisions. But Elaine was ready. One by one, her witnesses testified: her pharmacist, who explained how Chelsea twisted his words, her neighbors who vouched for her independence, her friends who saw her every week. Then came Dr. Alison Harper, who testified that Elaine's cognitive function was not only normal, it was sharp for her age. Finally, Elaine took the stand herself. Her voice was steady, her words piercing. "For years, I gave everything I had to my son and his wife. I covered their rent, bought their furniture, filled their fridge, $33,000. I thought I was buying love, but I was only buying silence. When they told me I wasn't special enough to attend their wedding, I realized the truth: I was never family. I was just money with legs." The courtroom was silent. And so I stopped. I stopped giving, I stopped begging for affection, I stopped pretending money could make me matter. Today, I stand here not as a confused old woman, but as a mother who has finally found her voice. When Judge Robert Langford delivered his ruling, his words rang like a bell of justice. The court finds that Mrs. Parker is fully competent to manage her own affairs. The request for guardianship is denied. Elaine closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she breathed freely. The weeks that followed felt like waking up from a nightmare. She changed the locks, installed new security cameras, and opened a fresh bank account no one else could touch. She reconnected with her sister Margaret in Boston, who wept over the phone and told her she had been waiting years for Elaine to finally put herself first. Elaine even found joy in small things again. She went back to her favorite salon, where Amanda Brooks styled her hair until she felt 10 years younger. She spent afternoons gardening with Linda Foster, her neighbor, who had shown her more kindness than her own son. She even began painting again, something she had abandoned decades ago. Most importantly, Elaine learned the beauty of saying no. Brian and Chelsea did not disappear immediately. They drove by the house, sometimes left angry messages, even threatened lawsuits they could no longer afford. But with every passing week, their presence in her life grew smaller, weaker, until eventually there was nothing but silence. And for Elaine, silence had never sounded so much like freedom. One sunny morning in Portland, Elaine visited the cemetery where her husband was buried. She placed fresh flowers on his headstone and whispered, "Robert, I finally did it. I stopped trying to buy love. I stopped letting them use me. I think you'd be proud." The wind stirred gently as if answering her. As Elaine walked away, she didn't feel like a victim anymore. She felt like a survivor, a woman who had finally learned the most valuable truth of all, that love is not proven by how much you give, but by how much you are respected. She wasn't just free of Brian and Chelsea, she was free to live again. Thanks for watching. Sorry for the interruption, but we hope you will help us improve our content in the future. What about you? What do you think of Elaine's story? Did she do the right thing by cutting off Brian and Chelsea for good? If you feel her journey touched your heart, comment 100 down below. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to share it so more people can feel